minutes to 1 hour with you and some amazing youth leaders talking about youth-led accountability for the Sustainable Development Goals, follow-up and review. And don't worry if you do not know any of these terms, if you haven't worked with any of these terms before, because we have three amazing young people who will share with us what these accountability, follow-up and review, SDGs mean to them and how they work with them and work on them practically on the ground. So we have an interesting lineup of sessions. And first of all, before I begin any of those sessions, I want to thank our partners, ActionAid Denmark, Restless Development, and the Major Group for Children and Youth, who played a critical role in organizing this webinar, but also in formulating the paper that we will be launching today named Believe in Better. So as I said, for those of you who are joining us and these discussions for the first time, accountability, follow-up and review can sound quite dry or quite abstract, but actually it is quite important because it is about holding powerful stakeholders responsible for their commitments and for their actions. If young people are not part of measuring progress and adjusting our strategies accordingly, then we risk leaving the most vulnerable groups behind. In the middle of the COVID-19 pandemic, which has affected all our lives, I think this conversation on accountability and youth-led accountability is more important than ever. We often see that young people do not have a seat at the decision-making table, but they still find creative and innovative, informal ways often to participate, whether it's through their own work, campaigns to improve meaningful participation, conducting shadow reporting, providing citizen-generated data, designing their own youth-led and monitoring frameworks, or sometimes championing SDG awareness at local and national levels. Young people are committed to making the 2030 agenda a success. And I know that is why most of you are also joining us today in this Zoom webinar, to be a part of that success and to be a part of the way forward. This is why today we are launching a new paper titled Believe in Better. It has been developed in partnership with my office, ActionAid Denmark, Restless Development, and the Major Group for Children and Youth. And this paper provides a snapshot of some of the lived experiences of young people around the world based on their stories and feedback. This paper also provides concrete recommendations for governments, civil society, and international organizations on how to make accountability processes more inclusive of young people in all their diversity. Speaking of diversity, I want to mention that we also have closed captioning available for this webinar. So if you will see a sign called CC, closed captioning, at the bottom of your screen, and please feel free to use that function if you are in need of that. We hope that this paper and today's discussion will be a powerful advocacy tool for all of us and will inspire further action to put youth-led accountability front and center of the decade of action. Decade of action is the next 10 years. The next 10 years, the next decade we have to achieve the ambitious sustainable development goals. I want to thank all the young people who have provided valuable inputs and suggestions in the consultations and the online survey that fed into this paper. And I will go through some of the main findings of this paper later in the webinar, so please stay tuned. And to begin our webinar's first session today, I want to give a little bit of an overview of what this 45 minutes or 1 hour would look like. First, we have three wonderful young advocates joining us today. So we will start out with a round of one-to-one conversations with them and learn about their work. In the second part, I will present some of the key findings of the Believe in Better paper. And then the youth speakers, the three young people, will come in and share their reflections and their responses to that those key findings. And thirdly, and in the final segment, we will take some questions from you and try to answer them with myself and the young people. But also, if you have more ideas, more stories, more comments and feedback, please feel free to send them in the chat box and in the form of questions and comments to all of us. So you can submit those questions during the event by logging into a Mentimeter. The instructions should be shown on the screen right now. And I see most of you all are raising your hands right now. So if you're raising your hand, that means you have a question or something important to say. So please go to the Mentimeter and ask your questions there, and send your comments and feedback there. And in the last segment, we will take those questions and comments and discuss them in this webinar as well. So first up in our first segment, we have Mithila Haq. Mithila is tuning to us from Chittagong in southeast Bangladesh, and as a volunteer, trainer and leader, Mithila has worked with over 5,000 young people in addressing gender equality, accountability, SRHR, and inclusive societies. So Mithila, welcome to our webinar. Thank you so much for joining us. And before I go into the questions about youth-led accountability, I would really like if you could share a little bit about yourself and how you became an accountability advocate with our audience.
Thank you, Jatma, for your wonderful moderation. And I would like to thank all the audience who joined with us today. And I'm really grateful because I got the chance to share the work that our young people are doing here in Chittagong and Bangladesh with people who joined us with us from around the world. And I'm really grateful for this. And yes, I'm Mithila, and you've already learned a short description on what I do. So when I first started my work, I didn't think that I would come here and talk about my work. I simply had one intention in my mind. And that intention comes from another story. When growing up in Chittagong, I have seen that in our city, there are lots of challenges and lots of problems. And young people especially, they face lots of taboos and they are not aware of social issues. So I thought that what I can do, because where there is challenge, there is always a chance to work there, and there's always a chance to develop. So I took my action. I took my place as a citizen, as an active citizen, and I started my journey from there. And from then, I have joined with Activista Network, and then I also formed our own small initiative, which is called Power to Bloom. It's a youth-led organization. And working with Activista is always a pleasure for me because it is a very strong network of young people. We are working now in 20 districts, and we are working on their capacity development, and we make them aware of their rights and needs, especially which are linked with SDGs. And we also provide them the knowledge on how they can work on their rights, how they can work accountability, advocacy, and on SDG in their own context.
Thank you, Mithila, and congratulations really to the amazing work that you have been doing so far. And there's no doubt that you will continue to do that work even better in the future. So I have two questions from you, and I'll ask both of them together, so you can answer it the way that you like, taking the time that you need. My first question is, what does it mean to do accountability work at the local level? What does it mean for you to work with your local government, local authorities, and sort of hold them accountable? And secondly, how has the COVID-19 pandemic affected this work you do, and how have you adjusted your work to suit this new reality that we are living in?
Thank you. So accountability to me works from two perspectives. One is from individual and another is from organization perspective. First of all, as a citizen of this country, I'm accountable myself for my own action and responsibility, what I'm doing. When I see a social injustice in front of my eyes, what I'm doing as a person. And secondly, the organizational accountability is the service providers, public institutes, where we are paying our tax and VATs to make their work continue They're accountable to us, what kind of service they are providing to us. Is that service youth friendly or gender friendly? So if I put both of them in one sentence, then I have to say that accountability to me is building a platform of young people and making them aware of their rights and needs, and then connecting them to the service providers, local authorities, local government, and make that government and authorities accountable for their action, for their implementation, budgeting, planning, everything. And this COVID-19 situation, we were not at all ready for this, but it has come. Now we are going through it. So it has changed a lot of things, and I think that SDG is now more important for us than ever, because of this pandemic. We can see that poverty level has increased here in Bangladesh. Our health system is quite exhausted. Our education has stopped. Personally, I don't know that when I'm going to finish my undergraduate study and when I'm going to enter into the job market. I don't know. And the violence against women has also raised, and they cannot ask for help. So there are so many things are going on in this SDG, in these goals. So I think we need to work on these goals right now more with more effort. And Activista Bangladesh is working from the very beginning of this pandemic. Our young team, they have organized many awareness sessions on health and hygiene in their communities. And some of them have already talked with their local authorities on setting up hand washing zones in their areas, and they are quite successful, especially the young team of Shatkira. They have already set up some hand washing zones there, and Shatkira is a very remote place, so it is quite a success. It's a very big success for them. And some of our young people are doing awareness on social distancing. They are distributing relief goods to the poor people. And some of our activist members, they have already collected the list of marginalized people, and they have given it to the local government and authorities who are distributing the emergency goods to the people, so that no one will left behind from getting the help. And some of our young people have already some of our young people are working on the budget, because you know that very soon the next fiscal year is starting here in Bangladesh. So they have already generated some evidence-based data collected from grassroots youth and marginalized people, and they have given the data to the, especially in Chittagong, we have given the data to our mayor and to our councillors and commissioner, so that we really hope that our expectation, our needs, and our demand will be reflected on the upcoming budgets and planning. And at the same time, our young people, some of our young people are working and lobbying in the national level as well, to make our demands and dreams implemented in the plannings and budgets. And yes, we are really hopeful, because within all this pandemic, we are still working, and yes, we are hopeful that we will do something good.
Thank you, Mithila. I think two things I really took away from your intervention is kind of universal to all youth organizations that I've had the pleasure to work with. And one of that is the amazing nature of flexibility and adaptability that you have. So the moment the pandemic hit, you were able to adapt your ways of working, the communities that you work with, into actually to convert it into a response to the pandemic, and to really protect and safeguard those communities. And secondly, sort of the forward-looking nature in terms of looking at and not forgetting the big picture, and making sure that you continue your policy advocacy at both national and local levels, to make sure that that your countries and your communities are prepared and are resilient for such shocks in the future. Thank you so much for sharing your work and your perspectives. And from Bangladesh, now I'm jumping to Cameroon. In Cameroon, we have Tangang Andrew joining us. Andrew is a program officer of monitoring and evaluation at the local youth corner, and he's an experienced advocate for youth mainstreaming in implementing tracking progress of SDGs. So exactly what we're here to discuss. Andrew has a long curriculum vitae, but I'm not going to read all of that, and I'm going to let Andrew describe for himself a little bit about his work and how Andrew got interested in accountability issues. Andrew, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Jayadma, and thank you to all the other panelists, as well as the partners that made this meeting possible. And I want to welcome all of our participants around the world. Now, as far as accountability, how I got interested in accountability issues, well, normally growing up, I realized there was always this divide between informal local development institutions like village associations and formal local governance institutions like municipal councils that are set up by the government. And there's a tendency for people to attach more to the village institutions because they can easily control, and the formal institutions which are highly political, the people cannot control. You find that the accountability mechanisms in those local institutions are better, but they have minimal finances and they cannot really engage in their issues. And again, those village institutions are always much more concerned with development issues at the local level and don't concern with anything international. So as a result of this, I started studying international cooperation, and I started working with my local village council in Bambui. And as a result of that, I started redirecting the orientation of the village council, and through the recommendation of the village council, I attended the World Conference on Youth in 2014, which Jayadma, of course, was one of the co-conveners. And from there, I came in contact with Restless Development Plan UK, and that's how it opened my mind to the concept of governance and accountability at various levels. So I took upon myself to go into ensuring that young people are really represented in all formal and informal institutions, and as well as holding leaders accountable. So as a result of that, I've been able to train municipal councillors and youth leaders on mutual accountability, and as well as carry out research on local accountability mechanisms within the framework of decentralization. And in the course of it, I've also realized that there's a concept of young people demand accountability, but on their own side, at times they are not accountable. So now I'm also promoting the concept of effective youth governance, where youth leaders are accountable to the young people who designated them who designated the leaders to manage youth-led institutions. So that's my part on about accountability.
Thank you very much, Andrew. And so glad to hear that you've been to Sri Lanka, and I hope that you got to enjoy some nice curry while you were there. So my two questions for you, Andrew, is one, how can we increase meaningful youth participation? Also from a lens of intergenerational co-leadership, how do we get young people and older people, or young people and policymakers rather, in formal and informal accountability processes to sit together and make these decisions together and do this planning together? At the same time, when we say intergenerational young people and policymakers, how do we make sure that in that cohort of young people, we actually include the most marginalized and vulnerable young people in our communities? Can you share some advice and a perspective from your experience?
Okay, yeah, of course. In order to talk about effective youth participation from an intergenerational perspective for accountability, I would like to make good use of some mechanisms that were proposed by Ali Altiok and Irena Grizel. Of course, they published a report within the framework of your office. We are here, an integrated approach to youth participation in peace process, in the room, around the room, and outside of the room. Now, the question about youth participation, we have gone past the level of saying young people are not represented. On the contrary, now, the question is, how do young people take advantage of the opportunities where they are now represented? So in the room, for example, you find out that many young people are now members of executive institutions, especially at the local level with municipal councils. You have young people who are now mayors, deputy mayors. The number has increased compared to before. So we expect these young people who are leaders to actually defend the opinions and interests of young people. And we also call on leaders now to actually ensure that these young people participate in audit and evaluation committees, And as well as young people should also make use of the knowledge they have to complement what the older generation already knows. The times are changing, the young people are more versed with the challenges of the changing times. Now, if we leave from inside the room and we go around the room, we think there should be a young youth committee should be created to formulate proposals on specific accountability issues and consultative meetings with young people, which means when in the process of developing policy, young people should be able to formulate their proposals, and this same committee should be able to follow up these proposals and ensure that they are being mainstream and leaders are actually working in that line. And then when we go to outside the outside the room process is a double process. We need the youth leaders who were designated or who are representing young people in formal institutions as well as informal networks to now combine with the youth consultative committees to go back to the communities and share information with young people. That's through information sessions as well as information through social media, through like town halls, where most of you can bring in the old people and the young people. They talk together on youth related issues. From that level, you can easily build trust between young people and their leaders. So I think the opportunity that has already been given to young people to come into those platforms is very important. And I think for the case of Cameroon, during the national dialogue that was convened to find solutions to the crisis we face now, you realize that young people played a very important and strategic role. Why? Because when the dialogue was called, the young people wrote a letter to the Prime Minister with their proposal. So the Prime Minister invited them for a discussion. And through this discussion and seeing that the young people had very bright and forward-moving ideas, the president of the Cameroon National Youth Council was designated as one of the deputy chairs of the national dialogue. And after the national dialogue, the committee to follow up the implementations of the resolutions also includes the young people through the voice of the National Youth Council. And I think that is very, very good. And just recently, we realized that in Cameroon, many, the recent local elections that just ended, it was recommended that at least a young person must be one of the deputy mayors or municipal executives, and that has been the case. So we are looking forward to making use of these young people who have been elected in these positions to make good use of to be a platform to follow up not just national policies but as well the SDGs at local level. And on the other question on how to get marginalized youth to get the perspectives from
Andrew,
marginalized.
sorry to cut you off here. Actually, I'm going to come back to you on the Q&A session for this particular question. I just want to make sure that we hear from Andrew as well before we run out of time for this segment. But I promise you that I'm going to come back to you. Andrew, welcome to you as well. Thank you so much for joining us. Andrew, why don't you explain to our audience a little bit about who you are and what you do and how you work on accountability issues? Sorry, Keith. I got Keith, your name wrong. I was looking at Andrew, so I was speaking to Andrew, but I actually wanted to invite Keith to take the floor right now. Keith, please, apologies for that mistake, and I would really like you to come on live now and also share with our audience what your work is and what you are doing on accountability.
Oh, thank you so much, Jahatma. I think for the first time, I actually thought you read my name Andere as Andrew. And wow, because Andrew has just come off the stage. But nonetheless, thank you so much for having me on the show today. And good afternoon, viewers. My name is Keith Andere. I serve as the Director of Programs at the Africa Youth Commission. Africa Youth Commission is a Pan-African youth network that aims to mobilize, to coordinate, and to engage young people, to provide them with a platform that is purely youth-led, to allow them to actually engage in this kind of discourse. So if you're here today and this is your first time, you're trying to engage on matters SDGs, this is some of the opportunities and platform that we actually provide so that young people can actually find the spaces for themselves. So today I sit here as the Regional Caucus Coordinator for a major group of children and youth, where the Africa Youth Commission sits and serves us. So our role really is to coordinate all the workings of the major group of children and youth is in our ECA region, which is Africa region, meaning coordinating all the efforts of the constituency through focal points from the region and also the global points from the region. But also I want to quickly thank the partners who we have continued to work together since the last HLPF and trying to continue to build up linkages since 2019 and working towards our regional conference and going towards forward. My accountability advocacy really started in 2016. I am a techie by profession. And after doing many years behind the computer log, tweeting and doing all these kind of things and coding, I wanted to figure out how can ICT go beyond business as a tech startup, and I thought, how can ICT benefit the larger community? And I actually got into an accountability by accident, as I call it, because as I was looking for somewhere to put around my time and contribute to a larger cause beyond my business, I got to join with a team of young people who at the time in 2016 were working towards bringing young people together to organize a side event during Banjul Plus 10 celebration, which was a commemoration of the Africa Youth Charter, the 10th anniversary that happened in Banjul. So I supported them, and through that engagement, just seeing the commitment of young people towards building an Africa that they thought they wanted and making it a better place, investing their own money, investing their own resources, to try and just sit down and say, what are some of the recommendations? What has happened for the last 10 years with the Youth Charter? How many countries has ratified? What does it mean for us, for young people? And how can we learn from those already who have done this? And that's how I actually began the journey, and have worked with Africa Youth Commission since then. And we continue to provide that space for young people to actually engage at a regional level, and working with different partners to see how can we meaningfully engage young people, and how can we meaningfully ensure that young people are organized, young people have that safe space that allows them to actually engage within their own rights and drive their own agenda. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Keith. And I see a lot of hands being raised on the Zoom platform. I just wanted to remind you, if you have questions for our speakers or ideas, if you agree with us, if you don't agree with us, please go to the Mentimeter, www.menti.com at the code 990018. Go to www.menti.com at the code 990018 and put your questions, comments, and feedback there. So Keith, thank you very much for that introduction. And I want to ask this question from you. In all the conversations we had, every young person spoke about how the COVID-19 pandemic has exposed the existing inequalities in our world and the existing gaps in our systems. How does this affect the Pan-African work that you do in the region? And what are some of the tools, or what are some of the ways that you make sure that ensure accountability at the regional level?
Thank you so much. I must agree really that COVID-19 has really exposed us naked in all possible ways, how we work, how government works, and how governments and different stakeholders purport to engage their constituencies. Yeah, but to begin with, I think very few countries, not only in the region but across the globe, have respect to freedom of expression, which is really a key pillar within the accountability processes. So as a result, either by design or otherwise, ICT and innovation has really been hindered, and this has seen a lot of furthering and worsening the inequalities that we are currently exposing. So COVID-19 in a way has really exposed these gaps. And what we're trying to see is people and government and everybody else trying to find a new normal of how to engage, and specifically finding digital ways of working, which in a sense, for the longest time, innovations and actually progression within these sectors had been suppressed because it worked to an advantage. So to bring this into context, for me, what is an accountability in itself, at least for the benefit of those who are here today for the first time? It's a noun that describes accepting responsibility, and it is a whole society, an intergenerational approach that is needed. And this is the only responsible approach to governance. So if we want to actually have a proper accountability, we need to have that, multi-sectoral approach to issues. But then there exists different type of accountability, and many, pundits put it into 4 baskets or 4 categories or 4 dimensions. The first one is horizontal. And the horizontal accountability is where state institutions and government agencies actually find accountability, either through parliament oversight or, one arm of government looking through the other. And this is actually the kind of accountability that citizen voice and the people's voice really miss, because there's a lot of opaqueness through which this accountability actually happens. And the second one is a vertical accountability, which is really mass-driven, it is citizen-driven to perhaps enforce a standard. This could be through elections, where we're trying to make sure that we have a standard of representation or whatnot. And the third one is social accountability. This is largely a citizen-driven. It's actually civil society, where they participate either directly or indirectly in demanding this accountability. And then the last and fourth is youth-led. I think this is where all our work and why we convene here today is because we are using and focusing on the youth-led accountability, where it's actually young people holding duty bearers and decision makers onto account. So from my experience here in ECA, during the first cycle of SDG review, this was 2016 to 2019, we've learned to promote a mutual bottom-to-top accountability process. And this process is a multi-stakeholder approach that provides for shared responsibility for shared aims. This approach then brings young people and youth as a stakeholder playing a role in these shared items, because then they're responsibility bearers, which sometimes involves, either new ways of working, taking formal processes into informal ones, because sometimes we have to meet the young people in their own spaces for it to make sense. Even the way we communicate, from our language of advocacy, from the kind of material that we actually do, we move away from the text that is usually UN driven to more of infographics, to more of, memes and things that speaks to young people, to reach out to them. The training approach that we take, again, is best suited in a way that accommodates the attention span, for example, for the millennials. So this, in a way, helps, breaking down the narrative and brings it to the context and the life of the people, into that day-to-day life experience that they can relate with. Because we felt like SDGs very high level. When we're hearing Jayatma, the youth envoy, is here on the webinar, everybody wants to sit down and says, I know nothing and she knows everything all, So just trying to bring this into context and saying, guys, this is what it means. And this is what you can actually do to take accountability. And this is, what it means. So at the regional level, I think one of the key things that we have learned, and we learned this from our colleagues from other regions, was how to engage and bring together that multi-stakeholder approach within the regional forum. The Africa region had the 6th one this year. So what we did and what has been going on over the years is to bring together a holistic engagement approach. And this year we actually had what we call the Victoria Declaration, which formalized a multi-stakeholder, a major group and other stakeholders plus civil society engagement mechanism at the regional level, so that we accommodate those who otherwise would have been left out, either by formal processes or because they were unable to formally engage into these processes. So the major groups and other stakeholders comprise, I think, over 10 major groups, and this speaks from children to youth, all the way to people with disability and the marginalized communities and whatnot. We've also seen—
Keith, if for the interest of time, I'm going to come back to you again after so now what I'm going to do is just to park that thought right there. And it really resonated with me, a lot of the things that you said, particularly the language about the SDGs and making the SDGs less of a UN process, but more of a people's process and more of a sort of a national and community process, was very strongly echoed in the policy, the paper that we are launching today, Believe in Better itself. So give me 5 minutes. I'm going to go to the paper right now and share with our audience who might not be familiar with this process a little bit of the key findings of the report. And then I'm going to come back to you and Andrew and Michaela to get these reflections from you as a response to some of the key findings that we had in the paper, if that's okay with you.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Keith. So with that, let me quickly run our audience through the key findings of our paper that we are launching today together with ActionAid Denmark, Research Development, and the Major Group for Children and Youth. The process is that we had in-person consultation with young people during the high-level political forum last year in New York. It also builds a lot on the existing evidence and existing research and data collection that youth organizations had done previously on these issues. It also included a short online survey and input from a wide range of partners who have been engaged in youth-led accountability for the past 5 years. So the first thing I like to highlight in the paper is the point that we have seen progress, but it's not enough. And I think that's what all three of them, Mitela, Andrew, and Keith also said, that there has been progress, but not enough. And, the member states present a voluntary national review, voluntarily driven by mainly member states with other stakeholders, and provide this sort of a report or a review that they do voluntarily at the national level. And they present this at what we call the high-level political forum in New York every July. And these are mainly state-driven processes, but also done in partnership with other stakeholders. So for an example, in 2019, out of these 47 voluntary national reviews that were presented at the HLPF, the high-level political forum, only 27 countries explicitly mentioned that young people were consulted in the preparation of the VNRs, or the voluntary national review. So today we are talking about youth-led accountability, but the reality is, even though we all know that it's important to include young people, only small minority of states actually let young people lead the process, let alone only less than half of them have actually consulted young people at a consultative level as well. However, this paper highlights some of the many ways that young people are claiming this space. So obviously, young people are not waiting for the governments to, open the doors and offer them a seat and offer an invitation. They're taking their own initiatives, and they're finding creative, innovative, informal ways to self-organize and run their own accountability mechanisms, such as scorecards, charters of demand, shadow reports, and youth monitors. And I really encourage all of you who are watching to dive into this report, because this report actually, the paper actually highlights some of these really good examples and case studies. And one of the things that I think is really important and really resonated with me is the accountability back to young people. So we usually make sure that we engage young people in the consultations, but we hardly report back to the young people and say that, okay, this is how the consultations resulted in, and this is how your inputs were taken or not taken. And we usually don't give that sort of feedback to our youth partners. We often use them to get input, but never to give feedback. So I think it's important that accountability processes are 360 degrees, so that, we encourage giving inputs, but also as institutions, and as particularly the UN and member states, that we also give accountability back to young people and be accountable to young people themselves. So when we were developing this paper, we have a lot of inputs based on inclusivity. So not thinking of young people as a homogeneous group, but really looking at young people as a heterogeneous group in all their diversity. And I think this was very much echoed by our youth speakers this morning as well. And in this survey, one of the key findings was, there was a question which asked which young people are specially excluded from monitoring and accountability processes. And the top 3 responses were young people living in the remote areas or rural areas. Second, young people living with disability or special needs, and this included young people living with albinism and HIV positive young people as well. And the third category was young women and girls. And other markers of the social exclusion cited by young people were LGBTQI and indigenous youth. So this is a good reflection that young people actually are aware of the existing systemic exclusions, and they're actually trying to work with these groups and put these groups front and center in their local advocacy and accountability work. Another important point is the importance of implementing a do no harm principle. The groups that we are talking about here are already marginalized in their communities. They face stigma and systemic discrimination. And in some countries, speaking up and taking a part in accountability processes can lead to serious repercussions. So it's extremely important that we create safe spaces for young people and make sure that there is no retaliation against them from state or non-state actors for this very important work that they do. And finally, the main recommendations suggest that the follow-up and review processes of the SDGs or should be embedded, localized, and transparent. So what does this mean? Embedded means that these processes and bodies that meaningfully engage young people as part of legislation, planning, and budgeting processes. So not just consulting young people when it's convenient or in the formulation processes, but really having young people as embedded as a part of the planning, implementation, and monitoring and review cycles of programs. It also creates creating an enabling environment, and again, this is very richly described in the paper, and I encourage you to read more into it. The second, localized. What does that mean? I think all three of our speakers have spoken today, particularly Mitela and Andrew, on the importance of localization. Their work with the village councils, their work with the municipalities, their work with the regional and subnational level governments, and how important it is that building partnership through those levels as well. And then of course sort of a regional perspective, and Keith has brought to the table how important it is that this agenda gets localized beyond the UN or beyond the global level conversations into actual local action. And thirdly, the transparency. If we are to expect that young people will take ownership of the agenda, will implement the agenda, will be a part of the agenda, then the process has to be transparent for them to know when to engage, how to engage, but also for young people to have trust towards these institutions. It's important that sort of global processes like the high-level political forum or the regional high-level political forums on SDGs, or national level processes deciding on the SDG implementation and follow-up and review, actually has ample time and resources for young people to prepare and meaningfully engage. And also there should be spaces to present shadow reports or spotlight reports or parallel reports while the states present the state-driven reports at the UN. So these are, I very quickly ran through some of the key findings that I found were really interesting and things I think we should continue to push for in terms of a collective youth priorities. But I just want to include now back Mitela to ask if any of these key findings actually resonated with her and her work, and if she has anything to add. Mitela, you have 2 minutes if you want to contribute.
Okay. Thank you. So yes, while going through the report, I see that this report has some important aspects for all of us. Like first one that touched me is there are some cases, successful cases on SDG where civic society involved in this SDG advocacy, accountability, and they gained the success there. And it's really important to me because I think it's really necessary. And the second one is that I find really useful is the support and engagement of the local authorities and government. It's really necessary because without their engagement or support, we cannot actually gain the success on the accountability process or the advocacy process. So it's really important. And the third one is very, very important, which is solidarity and alliance among the youth network who are working for SDGs. Because when we work together and we coordinate on within our work, I think it is going to bring better result for all of us, and I think that it's going to make the goals really sustainable for in every location and areas. And another thing is that in the report, it is suggested that in this sustainable development goals, we need to include the grassroots young people. And we need to localize the SDGs because yes, I really agree with Keith. If we talk about SDGs using really tough word, and if we do not educate our young people who are working in our communities in Chittagong, where they maybe do not know about SDGs, so we have to educate them on SDGs in easy words, and we have to include them in this process as a active agency. So I think that this really resonates in my work, and I think that if we read the report, if audience read the report, we all will find something helpful from this report that we can use in our work.
Thank you very much, Mitela. Andrew, I stopped you earlier when you were talking about the inclusion of marginalized and young people living in vulnerable groups. So feel free to count that into your reflections on the key findings of the report, and you have 2 minutes.
Yeah, thank you very much, Jayatma. Concerning the participation of marginalized communities, I just wanted to indicate that in convening youth consultations or for review processes, there should be a mandatory session specifically for young people with disabilities or special interest youth. And I think that's something that one of the organizations in Cameroon, Site Servers, did during the VNR process last year in Cameroon, 2019. And then national youth councils and youth representative bodies should ensure that special interest youth have a role to play as part of the executive and a committee specifically to deal with the issues of special interest youth. I think that's very, very important to mainstream them in all of these processes. You'll create a platform for them to be able to make proposals on what affects them directly. And now concerning the report, I just want to bounce from what Mitela said to add that what really resonates with me is this idea of voluntary local reviews at the municipal and city level. I think that's very important because by doing that, it creates a platform for the reviews to be bottom top, which means we'll not just be at national level and invite people, but municipalities can even organize their reviews. And why not national youth councils organizing their reviews? Why not universities organizing their reviews just to know what is happening as concerned the SDGs around them? Given that it's a whole of government process, it's everybody in the process. And finally, this idea of ensuring open access to information for young people. I think that's a responsibility for the ministries of youth affairs and national youth councils to ensure that young people have access to information. And if the young people don't go for the information, these institutions should ensure that the information meets the young people wherever they are, using social media platforms and other platforms that can be used to pass across this information. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. And Keith, now the floor is yours. Please feel free to combine what you wanted to say earlier on the inclusivity of processes in your reflections to the report as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jayatma. I think the best place for me to start as I join up what I was saying earlier was the youth-led accountability processes. And I wanted to speak about the UNMGCY, and it provides a unique space for the formal self-organized mechanism for young people to engage in the follow-up review of the 2030 agenda, which are the SDGs. And I just wanted to reiterate this to our viewers today and those who are joining us either for the first time or those who are continuing to engage, that this is your space and where the principle of universal and equitable access aims to provide meaningful engagement for all of you who are interested. So again, we are calling upon you as this is an open space for us to continue to engage, but more specifically, tying it down to the report. I think the report is a very good advocacy tool for all of us. Why? Because it speaks to the mechanics, it speaks to the technicalities, the what and the how that needs to be done. It speaks, you know, for me, one thing that touched me was that intergenerational that intergenerational solidarity and ensuring that structural barrier is actually, minimized. Because I think one of the key things that needs to happen is for us to co-lead and co-drive this agenda, because by ourselves we cannot, and by themselves they cannot. So I think that was one of the key things that, made me quite close to this report and resonates with me. But also most importantly, the provision of local review mechanisms, that it doesn't stop at national level. It goes way beyond national level, down to municipality, as Mitela has said, and I think we've seen a lot of, youth-led accountability and platforms at national level that are spearing up. And this provides an opportunity for these national SDG platforms to actually reach out down to the community and localize these actions and put the national agenda to resonate with this SDG agenda, because I think that is a lot of disconnecting link. We can't relate our national agenda to SDG as it were, and I would really like to see all of us reading this report and all of us actually just taking, because it spells out our roles, our responsibility, and to this we shall get that mutual accountability that I talked about, that has a shared responsibility to the shared aims. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Keith. And we've been getting a lot of very interesting questions from our audience. We have had questions from Zambia, Egypt, Nepal, USA, and so many other places. But we've kind of summarize some questions, and I would really like your input to these questions and answers to these questions. And please be very short and try to concise your answers in 1, 2, 3 to these very important questions these young people have raised. First question is directed to Mitela. Mitela, what do you think we can do to make accountability work more accessible for young women in particular?
Thank you. So from living in Chittagong, which is not as privileged as our capital city, I can say that accountability, make it more accessible for women. I think that it should be localized. Right now, there are so many platforms that is run by government, and our government is now thinking about young people, I would say, and it's a very sign of hope for all of us. But all of these happens in the national level in Dhaka. And for many young people, it's not possible to go there and join or send their voice there. So I think it's really important to localize this process in every region, in localities, so that I think the local young people, women especially, they can put their opinion and feedback that is related to the accountability. And in this accountability process, I think that in 2018, we worked on social audits, and on that we generated some evidence-based data where we collected data from young women, especially what kind of problems they face in the health sector, what is their problem, what kind of service they want on reproductive health or adolescent health, but they do not get. And we collected that data and we shared it with our local authorities, local hospitals, and after that we took they changed some of their they solved some of their problems in the hospital. So it was a success case for us. So I think that young people who are working in this grassroots sectors, I think we are also responsible to collecting evidence, in collecting the voice of young women who cannot actually express their opinion, and to bring them in front of to bring their voice to our local authorities, so that I think that they can also participate in this accountability process.
Yeah. Thank you, Mitela. And if I can add one more to that, I think creating safe spaces is also important still in a lot of the places. Sexual harassment, abuse, particularly targeting young women and girls, is prevalent, and violence against women and girls are at an all-time high as we speak. So creating safe and protected spaces also is important if we are to encourage more young women and girls to participate in these processes. Thank you so much for your answer. I'm just because we have so many questions and I would like to get at least as many as questions answered. So I'm going to ask you guys to keep your answers as short as possible so that we can respond to as many as questions we can. Andrew, any practical tips for working with local administrative government in SDGs local accountability?
Is the question again?
Any practical tips for working with local administrative governments on SDG accountability?
Okay, yeah. The very first thing is many local governments do not really know what SDG is all about. So first and foremost, it's important that you raise awareness, and as every other person said, we need to localize the SDGs, not treat the SDGs as a different process, but the local administrations should see everything they do to promote local development as an SDG process. So automatically, it's just about engaging with the local administrators, more or less like trying to target the young people who are in these platforms. So once you're able to get the young people who are local councillors or municipal authorities, you engage with them. The young people who represent youth in these administrations should be able to come back to young people and give information, collect information back to the administration, organize town hall meetings with young people to collect their ideas or impressions about certain issues. But I think the most important is raising awareness on SDGs, creating a relationship between SDGs and local development policies. From there, it is going to create a platform now to set targets and track those targets jointly, of course.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Keith, what strategic measures can we use to ensure that youth representative bodies are included in different levels of government ministries for accountability processes, accountable review reports? How do you see the role of youth councils?
Thank you very much. I think the question is very, very relevant. The only way for us to organize ourselves at national level and ensure that we have institutionalized our engagement is through having a national recognized body such as a youth council. Youth council plays a very central role in coordinating youth efforts at country level. Many times we've seen many governments not having youth ministry as a standalone ministry, and as a result, we see our ministry being tossed around either as a secondary ministry to the other, or it keeps moving from one ministry to another with every change of government. So I think the National Youth Council, if we are able to take much time to strengthen the National Youth Council, we are able to achieve this much more, much easier, because one, we can advocate for funding of youth engagement through such structure of a youth council. Two, we are actually able to reach out to the networks of youth-led structures that are existing at community level, down at the local level, because that is what the Youth Council is able to do, to reach out to the very, very marginalized people and speak to the language that it does. And many times we see linkages with Youth Council and actually having accountability structures within themselves in a way that we ensure that we actually put the leaders who are within the Youth Council accountable to their action, accountable to their people. And I think this is what my co-colleague was talking about, being accountable to the people who put us to these positions. In some countries like Gambia, for example, the Youth Council is accountable to the National Assembly. So as a result, you find that they are able to question government. You are talking about youth engagement on this, but you are not able to put resource. But at the same time, government is able to question the engagement of young people. So I think in a manner, this provides an opportunity that institutionalize our engagement. And as a result, we don't have to see change of people coming in. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Keith. And we have reached the maximum time we have for this event. So the last question, I'm going to answer it myself. And that question is, how can young people build confidence to participate and engage? What are the key factors you use in your work? So personally for me, when I was working as a youth advocate and now I'm working at the UN, and there are so many topics that I need to work on, how I build confidence to participate and engage is really two things. First, read a lot. I read a lot. Every topic that I have to talk about or I have to intervene about, I do a lot of research, try to understand processes, because at the same, I feel like the content is as important as the process. So try to understand both processes and the content. How does local reviews or local accountability processes fit into the national processes? How does that include in the UN processes? So try to understand the process and then try to understand the content, and then you will find it easy to find entry points for you to contribute and where you can actually add value to the process. And secondly, there's a lot of work that is happening. So try to find allies, try to find partners. Always multiple voices are stronger than one voice. So if you want to push through one agenda, if you want to advocate for climate action, or if you want to advocate for SRHR, find your allies, find other youth organizations in your community, in your country, or at the global level. There's a lot of work that has happened so far. There's a lot of toolkits and resources and booklets and infographics that are already out there, which I'm sure many youth organizations will be more than willing to share with you and cross-promote and cross-facilitate these limited resources that we all have. So my two advice for building confidence and tips will be read and understand processes and substance, and to build alliances, build coalitions, and that is the best way we can push for long-term systemic changes. So thank you very much for these very important and practical questions. We are so glad that all hundreds of you who joined actually stayed through to the end of the webinar, which I hope is a testament to how interesting this conversation today was with Mitela, Andrew, and Keith, but also the good work that went into producing this paper, both from my office, ActionAid Denmark, and Restless Development. Thank you again, everyone, for joining. The report is accessible through this link now you see on the screen. I know you can't click it and download the report, so I will make sure that the report goes on my website, and I'm sure our partners, ActionAid Restless and MGCY, also will make it available on their websites as well for you to download and read. Thank you very much. Stay safe, stay engaged, and if you have any input or feedback, or if you want to stay engaged in this conversation, you can write to me on youthenvoy@un.org. Thank you very much.